Welcome everybody who's coming in and joining us. We're going to let people kind of trickle in for the first minute or so. Thanks everyone for being here and joining us tonight. All right. It is 7:01. One more person. All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure a few people are going to pop in as we go, but I would love to go ahead and get our session started tonight. Welcome, welcome. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. We're so happy to have you here, and we're so glad that you're joining us for this second session of Gloucester Education Foundation's conversation about parenting during a pandemic. Welcome to everybody. Some of you were here last week. We had a great session talking to our expert panelists, and I'm sure this week's will be just as insightful and reassuring for all of us too. I know I took a lot away from our conversation last week, and thanks to everyone who submitted questions and was part of the conversation. Just really introductions. My name is Aria McElhenney. I'm the Executive Director of Gloucester Education Foundation. Really quick background, we're a nonprofit. We were founded by Gloucester parents about 15 years ago with the goal of supporting innovation and creativity in our schools and making our district one of the best in the state. Since then, we've raised about $8 million for the Gloucester schools to fund programs in art, science, math, literacy, you name it. And our programs are in every single school in our district. All of our work is only possible because of generous people in our community and businesses who donate to our programs. So a big shout out and thank you to our wonderful supporters. We're here for the second of our two community conversations about parenting during a pandemic. This week, our panelists will respond to some questions that came in after last week's conversation. And we'll also delve into strategies for managing the summer and how to keep our kids and ourselves fit and healthy, both mentally and physically during this time. We planned this event so that we could all come together as a community and tap into some expert help, get answers to questions and share ideas about what's working and maybe what's not as we figure out a totally new experience of parenting during a pandemic. Before I introduce our fantastic panelists and get started, I just want to give you a few quick housekeeping things. One is that our meeting is being recorded tonight and we'll post it afterwards on social media and our website and YouTube. So please share it when you see it come up for friends who maybe couldn't join us tonight. We encourage you to keep your video on so we can see each other and wave at our friends, but please keep your microphone muted so we can hear our panelists. It's helpful to keep your screen in speaker mode. So if you're not in speaker mode, you can go to the top right corner of your screen, hover your cursor over the top right corner, and then click, you'll see a little grid, and just click speaker mode so you can see which panelist is talking during the conversation. If you have a question or an idea to share, we would love to hear it, and we will get as many questions answered as we can by our panelists. To submit a question, just click the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, and John will be monitoring the chat and he will bring your question to the panelists during the conversation. So don't be shy, please ask away. Everything is valid and important. So let's get on with this wonderful event, and a huge thank you to our panelists who are so generously donating your time and your expertise to us tonight. First, I want to welcome Dr. Mark Konecki. Mark is a clinical psychologist and a psychoanalyst in private practice in Gloucester. He has advanced training in cognitive behavioral treatment and specializes in treating anxiety and depression for adults and families, and has clinical specializations in child and adolescent therapy. Mark, thank you so much for joining us this week. We're glad to have you here. Also,
thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Also, back with us this week is local pediatrician Dr. Brian Orr. Brian has written 2 parenting books and many parenting articles. He works with local nonprofits and international care systems for children. He's an artist and a storyteller and just a great guy. Dr. Orr, thank you for being here tonight. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We also have the lovely Rebecca Wetter, who's school psychologist at O'Malley Innovation Middle School here in Gloucester. Rebecca has been at O'Malley for 20 years and since receiving her certificate of advanced graduate study from Tufts in 1998. She focuses on incorporating mindfulness and trauma-induced teaching practices into the classroom. Rebecca, thank you so much. Welcome back. Also joining us.
Thank you for having me back.
You bet. Also with us is John Saruf, who's helping moderate and bring in your questions from the chat to our panelists. John is a local parent, a member of the Gloucester Ed Foundation Board of Directors, and an expert at facilitating public dialogue. So with that, let's move on to our program tonight. We're going to start out tonight's conversation with some questions that came in after last week's event. Some people sent in some questions through a survey that we sent out to all our participants. There were a lot of questions or some, conversation about the start back to school and there's a lot of unknowns and fears and, people being curious about kids having to wear masks and what's going to happen when kids go back to school. And in conversation, we decided because there's so many unknowns about back to school at this point, we don't have a lot of information about specifics. So we're going to kind of table that conversation for now. And my hope is that we can host another panel later in the summer where we can really delve into some specifics as we go back to school and involve some people from the school district in that conversation too. But there is one question that came up that I wanted to put out to Rebecca. If we could just address it, before, as we get started. Is anything happening in the conversations that you're involved with the school district and to help our kids as the planning takes place going back to the new school year? Any conversations about helping our kids deal with the social emotional challenges that they might be facing when we go back to school?
Yes, I emphatically say yes. We're already in talks about how to support all of our kids' social emotional needs as we go back. I think you should all be reassured that city leaders and school leaders are in communication with the state about specific guidelines for how to reopen. And part of that is addressing the social emotional needs of our kids. The group that I'm closely tied to includes all of the mental health professionals in the district. And we've already had multiple conversations about itemizing specific needs for kids. So this is really on the forefront of all of our minds. Our typical kids are going to need a lot of support just getting back to the routine of learning, whatever it may look like, whether it's remote, whether it's a hybrid, whether it's, full schedule. So we recognize fully that we're going to be needing to do a lot to kind of support that aspect of our students. And also too, just know that we're even talking a lot about how to support our special population of students, whether they're special needs kids or whether they're individuals that might need a little bit more support coming back. We also recognize that parents are going to need some support in this, and that once we know what school is going to look like, I think there will be very specific things designed to get information out to parents as soon as possible so that they know how to support their kids too, and so that we can quell any fears that parents might have about school, like I said, whatever it's going to look like in the fall. So yes, we're on it.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I'm sure it's reassuring for a lot of us who are just very, feeling a little nervous about that whole process. So thank you for filling us in. Brian, I'm going to go to you next. And I think this can be kind of a through line with all of our questions tonight, but this was something that someone wrote in and asked about, and I think it's really an important point. Can you offer just any practical day-to-day strategies for us right now, getting through the day, managing our kids? We're managing remote learning, and also the summer is looming. Do you have any tips, or what are you hearing from in your practice of how people are managing things, and what advice are you offering to people? Ryan,
It's a tough time, and a lot of people are having a hard time and getting very tired of managing the kids at home, managing their schooling. So it is tough. I think it takes a lot of creativity. I think what we need to do is try to bring in a lot of variety to what we're bringing to our kids. There's a lot of sites, websites, and otherwise. I think I brought up before, Comfort Zone is a section of the globe that every day is putting in new ideas about what parents can be doing with their kids. School is winding down for a lot of kids. I hear a lot of kids are, trying to get to the end of that, and parents trying to push their kids over the line for the last couple of weeks. But after that, then what? So it's hard, but there's a variety of things that we can do. Certainly, we need to get outside. We have to expand our group, perhaps, of people that we can be in touch with and stay safe and everything. We can talk about that later. But I think we have to expand our group, let our kids have some friends to be involved with. My big thing is variety and really looking at doing different things. And this is like, I compare it to cooking, cooking and getting the recipe. Once you have it and you have the ingredients, you can cook. But it's really the forethought of what are we going to have for dinner every night is the hard part to come up with. What's the meal tonight? So with a little bit of forethought and thinking ahead and looking at different sites, you can come up with a lot of different things, from museums to concerts to different explorations of different places, all online, that can be entertaining for kids. Last week I talked about also not having things where you're always, kids are often coming to you that they're bored, or not always coming up with things for the kids to do, but actually having kids-centric things. Let them come up with things that they want to do with you. So that's not always the parent's responsibility. You could also make lists together of what do you want to do? What are the things that you like to do and want to do? And I'll make a list, and let's compare that list as to what we can do together and what you can do on your own, and we can mix that list and put it up and do those things together. So it's going to take a lot of creativity in the summer. Hopefully some camps will open up. At least people can get outside and get to some beaches and stuff. So it's looking for variety and being very creative.
Sounds like some good tips. Put the lists on the fridge. Mark, I wanted to see if you have something to add to that, because you and I talked a little bit earlier, and you were saying you've been hearing, like, people just say there's a lot of fighting in my house right now. There's a lot of arguing going on, and I know I've certainly seen and felt that in my own house at times. So I'm wondering, in terms of practical day-to-day strategies, what would you add to that related to getting along?
Well, as usual, I agree with everything Dr. Orr just said. I guess I would add concretely, and I invite Dr. Orr, if he sees it a little differently, to jump in. But I think while I'm a fan of video games in general as a way of helping kids develop all kinds of cognitive skills, I think it's really important for people to actually impose a structure, for parents to impose a structure on activities in general, but especially video games, making them time limited and hopefully not too restrictive. I think generally Dr. Orr and I think, have about the same amount of time. When pre-COVID, 2-hour maximum was kind of my idea about video games per day. And I think you probably have to give a little bit of room on that. But I think it's important to make sure kids aren't revving themselves up too much on those kinds of activities, but also to join in with them as a parent sometimes to the video game is a fine thing to do. But also the other practical strategy that I have is actually Mr. Rogers on Amazon. I watch his shows kind of over and over for ideas about child psychology in general and adult psychology in general, but also ways of doing therapeutic and growth promoting activities. He is filled in every episode with simple ideas about different ways to look at the world, as Dr. Orr was saying, the different ways of making the recipe for the meal. Check Mr. Rogers out. He's terrific.
Wow, that's a great idea. I love Mr. Rogers, and
Yeah.
I love that this weekend.
I do too. I do agree that we've talked even last week about expanding the screen time, because everybody, we are doing screen
Yeah.
time, right? So
Right.
screen
Yeah.
time has expanded. I think the issue is that we do have to set some limits. I think some variety and having some expectations about doing something different from what they're usually doing. I think kids really do fall into a trap if they're doing the same thing over and over and over again. I think that's why I say you have to say, okay, you've done that enough. We really have done that enough. Now it's time to get outside, or we said we were going to go to Good Harbor, or whatever it is, that there should be some expectation that there's something beyond just the screens.
Right, and set that up, as if you can, set that up ahead of time with the kids, like Dr. Orr was saying earlier, that, strategize what the day is going to look like with the kids together, so they know when the transition times are, when what particular activity is happening at what particular time, so they're not surprised in the middle of a game. Okay, now it's time to go. Make sure you give them plenty of warnings and so on. That always helps.
Yes, that's a good reminder. Transitions are always the hard part.
Yeah.
Well, I think, and that kind of brings us to our next question, which is another one that came in from someone who attended last week. Rebecca, I was going to throw this over to you, that I think a lot of us right now are feeling a little nervous that summer is coming and it's not going to look like our summers normally look. Camp, we don't even know what's going on with camp. A lot of us count on those things as working parents too. Our normal activities just aren't going to be there for us. So Rebecca, do you have any tips on that, or any insight on what's going on locally, maybe what is going to be available, and how we can deal with the next few months?
Sure. I have a lot to say about that, because I've been doing a lot of research, talking to parents and looking at websites and seeing what is available for families. That idea of massive amounts of unstructured time certainly raises my anxiety, having 2 kids of my own. So I completely understand that. So I think on the whole, because this summer is so weird and we're not really sure, the time frames of when things are going to be opening, we're not really sure about what camps are going to be able to have kids and operate. I think we need to just get our general mindset around this summer is going to be different. So we need to shift our expectations for how engaged our kids are in structured activities. Now, that being said, the one thing we can count on are those virtual camps. O'Malley Academy is doing a whole host of offerings through the O'Malley Academy after school program does a free summer program for kids. So there will be some offerings there. I saw Allison Alves on the list of attendees tonight, so I want to give her a little plug. Also, there are also some virtual camps. There's one called like Varsity Tutors. They have like a Minecraft camp or a science camp. Now, those are not ideal for most of our kids. I think there are a very unique bunch of kids who are really thriving in this online learning environment. They're the kind of kids who are going to get a lot out of those experiences, and those can offer a little bit of structure. I think for our other kids who are more interested in the outdoorsy, sports related camps, the good news is that there's a shred of hope that there will be some offerings this summer locally, both in the sports camps and more like the outdoorsy adventure camp type. When I looked on my research, it's seemingly like there might even be some sports leagues that will be operating later on in the summer. So to be like determined on that, depending on how things go with, you know, the phased opening of Massachusetts within the next few days, I think we'll know more. When you go online to some of these camps, they're offering registration and free tuition reimbursement should the camp be canceled. But I think a lot of camps are looking to operate at about 30% capacity and are able to do so. So I'm hopeful that there will be some options for kids. But I think on the whole, we need to just reframe our vision of our summers and just know that it's not going to be the typical summer. We're going to have kids laying around in our house for longer than we would like them to. There's probably going to be too much gaming, social media, things like that. But I do think there is a shred of hope that there's some offerings. The other piece is I think, and I don't want to get too long-winded, but I love what Dr. Orr and Mark were saying about giving kids options. And I think within what is allowed in the phased opening, we might need to help our kids brainstorm about what kinds of activities they are able to do with their friends and how that might look. So we might need to even have some concrete conversations about what's your menu of options and what is allowed now that we're in phase 2 and things like that. So I think having a variety is certainly key, and reshifting our expectations, but then also holding on to the hope that there might be some good structured offerings. But I'll get that information to you, Aria, as I find it. So it might not be coming for the next couple of weeks, though.
Okay, that would be great.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in real quick?
Yes, please.
To that, just to add to what Rebecca was saying, I think one of the conversations to have with our kids is what our expectations are as parents regarding their mask use when they're off our premises and out of our sites. What I've found in my own clinical practice is adolescents do not wear masks and do not social distance when they're off site. You know, that's just tricky. And then if your 12-year-old wants to go play basketball, you know, say the playgrounds are open and they want to play basketball, and you say, well, I prefer if you keep a mask on. I think we can pretty much count on the fact that kids are, even if they are, have a genuine desire to comply, their peer pressure is going to be high to take the mask off. And also, when I've been seeing kids in my backyard with masks and keeping social distance, but what I find is I'm having to continuously remind them that their mask has gone awry and it's not fitting on their face right, or it's completely on the top of their head. And it's, you know, you have to like just be prepared to stay patient with them, because it's really a crazy thing that we're asking them to do. Mm-hmm. But it's worthwhile having a conversation in your family and being realistic about what the expectations are and what kind of compliance you can get from your particular kid.
Yeah, that's very.
I think, you know, to kind of piggyback on that, I agree that, you know, wearing a mask is yet another behavior that we're going to be required to teach our kids, and is likely going to be required in some capacity for a long period of time in certain situations. So the best thing that we could do as parents is give them situations to practice wearing the mask. And what that might mean is having a friend over your house and being there
Right.
to kind of
Right.
guide that and prompt them. It will only help in the future, because this might be a long time that we might be expecting kids to be wearing masks in groups and in public.
I think it's going to be a long time because COVID's not going to go away. We're going to get over a peak, but we're going to get down to a lower level. But by all predictions, it's going to come back as another peak. And so we do have to be smart about how we go forward. The interesting thing is that there are in different parts of the country and different parts of Gloucester, there's different attitudes amongst families. And there are some families that say, well, this is baloney and I don't want to wear a mask. And so there's groups of kids going off and they're not wearing masks. I saw some kids at the beach the other day and none of them had a mask on. So that's going to be the tough thing. I think for the most part, kids have been doing very well health-wise, as I said last week, in regards to COVID. The risks are much more in people with risk, and there are some kids with risk, but it's more the elderly that's at risk. So I think it's going to be more important to teach our families what our expectations are and what we do and why, because we have grandma living upstairs, or we have, if you want to visit your grandparents this summer, you're going to have to be protected and we're going to have to stay safe. Hand sanitizer, they can carry one with them. So I think we have to teach our standard of what we're doing in our family and why it is that way. It may not be for the kids' health, because the kids are doing fine. They're not getting that sick. I've had teenagers sick. I've had whole families with COVID, but most of the time the kids are asymptomatic, and that's the fact of the matter. Unfortunately, there are some more serious side effects of it too, in some rare cases for kids. So there are reasons why we have to make sure our kids recognize that our peak is down and we're opening up a little bit, but this is still a serious pandemic that's going to be going on for a long time. And I agree wholeheartedly that this is here for a while, and this is the new normal, and wear your mask. This is what we do, and we're doing it to protect grandma, grandpa, or cousin Joe who has immune deficiency.
The tough reality that we're in. John, I'm gonna throw it to you quickly because I know you had a question come in. This is going a little bit back to the practical strategies we were talking about. I think you have a parent who had a specific question.
Yeah, there's a parent with a specific question about their middle schooler who has an IEP and is struggling with remote learning. Wants to make sure that people know that the specialist at the school is doing a great job in supporting them, but just needs some more tips for how to support their student through these next few months and next few weeks, I guess.
I think this is probably a good question for me to field, because this has been my role for the last 3 months, is really shifting to supporting parents and how to support their kids with the remote learning. It is very challenging. For our typical kids in a lot of cases. I just, as a side note, I read an article where educators on the national level were talking about the skills that are required for remote learning are actually skills that don't develop until college. So we're asking our kids to do very difficult things as far as self-regulation, organizational skills, time management, navigating the technology, all of it. What I would say is every kid is unique, but the general things that I feel like have been working best for our kids is to support the kids with the organizational aspect of it. Accessing the work, having the right materials, and figuring out the time management. It's going to look different for every kid based on what their unique situation is. I would say the other piece of that is to partner with your contacts at school, because they can help you troubleshoot. I think the good news is that or I know, the great news is that the teachers are very understanding of this challenge. You are the parent, you were not trained as a teacher. We as teachers have not been trained in teaching remotely either. So there's the opportunity for a lot of glitches along the way. I think finding your go-to person in the school and troubleshooting around specific challenges is the way to go, but also know that the schools are very understanding in this. The other offshoot of this is that we know that this is nothing we as educators were trained to do. However, we've learned a lot within these last 3 months about what works for kids, what works for families, and there's already a committee in the works analyzing that and getting feedback from kids and parents so that should we ever have to go remote again, that there'll be different structures in place knowing what the unique needs are of the parents. So I hope that answers your question. And I'm sorry your middle schooler is struggling. It's not a unique challenge though. There's a lot of kids that are not programmed for remote learning.
Can I just pitch in one thing that I think that it's hard on parents, especially parents with special kids with special learning issues. And I think that pulling in resources wherever you can, even if it's an uncle who can take the child for a day or do a virtual safari with the child or doing something. My wife and I are doing this with my niece and nephew, both who have learning issues. One's just below middle school, 5th grade. So it just helps to relieve the parent of some time of doing some of this learning. In fact, I think it also lends itself to that issue of the summertime. And because if we're not going to have less camps and less people able to go to camps, then I think partnerships between families and extended families to help out in supporting is the way to go. This is what we have done as human beings back centuries to help and pull in family, call in help wherever you can get it. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, if possible, and that's not always possible in this age, I understand. But wherever you can pull in some help, it's a good way to go, even through the summertime for all families, especially those with kids with special needs.
Thanks. That is all really good, helpful advice. I think I'm going to go, Mark, I'm going to go to you with our next question, which is also something that came in. And this is kind of related to what we were just talking about too, and asking for help. But this is a question that came in from someone who attended last week, you know, in that it's about how do we take care of ourselves as parents? You know, we're at this point where we're around each other, we're around our kids all the time right now. I was joking with a teacher the other day, you know, like, oh, you're going to need a spa vacation after this. And she was like, I would settle for a trip to the bathroom by myself right now. Because she's going to teach, well, taking care of a toddler. And I think we're all, you know, we've all kind of maxed out in some ways on family time. And we all know that in order to be a good parent, we have to be taking care of ourselves as well, but it's really hard to do in this setting. So I'm wondering if you have tips for, in terms of helping us be a good parent, what kind of self-care can we do for ourselves that will help us model good things for our kids and also be better at what we're, you know, at helping them.
Yeah, and I think the question actually brings me back to something that I missed in your answering your first question about people having short tempers during this crisis, which I want to get back to. But I think that I mean the first thing that I'm learning in terms of, and you know, you learn a lot from the people that you treat, even if you're the professional who's supposed to know all the answers. Actually, I do a lot of learning from the people that I work with, and some of the things that parents are teaching me is having a frame around the day-to-day, which can get extremely taxing, but the frame being that this COVID crisis will end eventually, and the family time that we have now will not be there, and that there was a way in our culture before this where people were a little overscheduled and a little too busy. And in fact, I have several parents who are saying to me, this is the first time in many years that we've all had dinners together, even more than once a week. So people are getting something out of it that's positive. Also remember, in terms of frame, when you have kids like I do who are in their 20s, you never see them. And so you long for those old days when you saw them all the time. So just remember that developmentally things will feel differently. In terms of how to manage toddlers is extremely hard, but to try to say something general, the more, and I think Dr. Orr and Rebecca were getting to this as well, but the more that you can provide structure to the day in terms of all that involves is planning activities at certain times of day and not letting an activity go too long, even if it's a fun activity, but then helping them make a transition. And you can try to schedule time for yourself during the day where you actually, I mean, some moms and dads are working and taking care of little kids, so they have to fit that in. But it really involves a lot of extra planning, which can be stressful, but that's the strongest suggestion that I can give, and what I've seen in terms of people in my practice, what's successful for them is making sure that they plan out the day and leave some time for their own needs to work out or to converse with a friend or to have a glass of wine with their partner at the end of the day. That's all very, very important.
If I could add something that Dr. Orr said last week that really resonated with me, that I think we should all focus on again as parents, is that we need to get rid of the guilt about being the perfect parent and doing all the right things all the time for our kids. And that part of the self-care is to have a little forgiveness for yourself and know that things aren't going to be perfect. And I think that's, number one. The other thing is try to take 15-minute breaks. Even I feel like that was the time that's most manageable, even no matter the age of your child. If you can just get away and shift your focus from always giving to your kids and do something, whether it's listen to a podcast, walk to the mailbox, sit outside and have somebody else watch or stay with your kid for 15 minutes or set them up with something that they can do independently. Those kind of mini breaks throughout the day really helped me when I was dealing with small kids, but also something that other parents have said has worked for them.
Well, I'm really annoyed for Rebecca for taking all my lines. But I think it's really important for all of us to step back for a second and reflect on this time. Talk about mindfulness. This is a time where we have to really think about this. This is a time in history that is going to be marked by historians. This is like when 9/11 happened, or World War II, or when Kennedy was shot, or you can mark some of those times in your life. At least I can. And so it's really, really a difficult time. And this has to be, yes, try to keep some structure and time and in the family. It's an important thing, especially to get through the end of the school year and stuff. But I think it has to be a very forgiving schedule. And I think we have to forgive ourselves for not being perfect, because we are not going to be perfect during this time. This is not a time that anybody can be perfect. We are dealing with uncertainty. And that, for human beings, is a hard, hard thing to deal with. We want things sometimes overscheduled, right on time. We want the weather report. We want to know if it's snowing tomorrow, so I know if I have to get up and snow blow my driveway. I want to know what my commute time is going to be. I don't want things to be uncertain. I want things to be like clockwork. And this is a time where we can't expect that. We can't expect that for September or beyond. And that is a very discomforting thing. But then we have to come back to ourselves and say, like Rebecca was saying, this, and Mark was saying, this is family time. This is family time, and we have to care for each other. And this is what we get back down to, really basic things of loving and caring for our kids. This is the time for just appreciating some things that we just do have, that we have food on the table, we're eating together. And as far as kids and how well they're going to do through this, I want to remind everybody that kids do well. They do the best education-wise and otherwise, so long as they're eating, well cared for, they're read to at home. They, you know, our home lives and how we just construct that with a loving environment is what is going to make our kids thrive through this. These might be the COVID kids when they're getting into high school and college, but they're going to recover from this. Their education is going to recover from this. And we just have to recognize the time that we're in and step back and say, okay, I'm going to try to keep this structured. I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to be the best that I can as a parent. And if that's getting them through one class in the day or getting them to the beach and back and accomplishing one thing, well, then you did that. That was your best thing today. Way to go. Because we just have to be very forgiving about this.
I've always said that, Dr. Orr, you're a psychologist and a physician.
Oh.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That was a compliment. I think along those lines, I heard someone say recently that we're in a crisis, but it's not a sprint crisis. This is a marathon that we're in right now. This is the long haul, as we've been saying for a while tonight. And now I think, like, while the world is kind of slowly reopening, you know, that's giving us hope, and that's good. And then, but we also at the same time need to be prepared in this long haul to know that things will shift backwards at times, potentially. Things, you know, you might think an activity is going to happen, and then it just doesn't, because whatever, there was a spike or something. And I'm wondering if Rebecca, I'll put this to you first. If, you know, are there strategies that you can think of that help us kind of prepare in advance for those types of things with our kids? I mean, I guess they're getting pretty good at disappointment at this point, but you know, as we go forward into the, you know, the coming year, even, how can we help our kids be ready for those things?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And our kids will continue to deal with not only uncertainty, but there is the likelihood that certain things might start and then stop. School might be one of those things where we go back and then we might have to revert back to a remote learning situation. All of these things are absolute possibilities. I always find that depending on the developmental level of your child, you need to have conversations about this to kind of give them a little bit of information. Of course, depending on how old they are and how much information they can digest, you're going to give them more facts about the world and what's going on. I don't think there's any harm in having a conversation with some of our older school age kids and our teenagers about, you know, COVID is tricky. It's not something that we know a lot about. We are learning more about it as the weeks roll on, but there is this chance that there could be a spike, and that we might have to go back to having different behaviors. I think there's, I think the kids are going to have a little bit of an easier time reverting back to the remote learning after having done it. So there's kind of a little silver lining there. I think it's going to be been there, done that. We know what that's all about. We know how to do this. I think schools and teachers and parents will be a little bit more prepared. But so that'll be the one thing that I think might go a little bit easier should that happen. But on the whole, I think giving a little bit of information and having ongoing conversations with kids just to have them be a little bit prepared is not a harmful thing. We don't want to overshare though. So you don't want to be sharing like too much data and scary kind of stats and things like that. But giving a general overview, I think, is not a harmful thing for kids. It's actually helpful.
Mm-hmm. Just some
I
facts.
agree.
I feel like they know what might be ahead. Dr. Orr, did you have
One
something?
thing that I would, I'm sorry, one thing that I would pitch in there is that, you know, I think it's important for families to get out of just the family and know a little bit of what's happening even within our community. And I think, you know, there may be somebody who may not be able to mow their lawn, or an older couple who can't go to the store, or maybe you can, as a family, shop for them and have the kids deliver the food to their doorstep, or deliver meals for the open door once a week. I think it's involvement in some kind of work where we're getting out of ourselves to recognize, hey, this is beyond us. This is not just something that's happening to us as a family. It's happening to everybody, and everybody's suffering this. There's a lot of people hurting with this, and jobs and sickness, etc. And for us to say, hey, look, we don't have to be sitting at our home hunkered down and fearful. We can get out and do something. And so I think this is a time where I really feel very strongly that families should get out and say, okay, who's the older couple in the neighborhood that needs food delivered? Let's ask them let's call them up and say, hey, we're going running to the store. Can we pick things up for you? Or any number of things that you can think about doing for close neighbors or community. These things are important for kids and for us to get out of just our minds and ourselves, to recognize that this is bigger than us. And I think that's also helpful for us to deal with it, because we're doing something. We're doing something actively that is, you know, a little bit of charity, a little bit of help, and we just feel like we're contributing something. And I think that's important for kids to learn.
That's really good insight. I like that. I'm going to take that back to my house for sure. I think, Joan, I think we had another question come in that's kind of is going back to social interaction and wearing masks and that kind of stuff. I know there's a lot of questions about that out there right now.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and it sounds a bit like it's both a medical question and a social question, which is how much time can I allow my child to spend in a group if he's wearing a mask and no one else is? So there might be a medical side to that, but also a social side to that.
Mm-hmm. So I'll start by saying that if you're outside, if you're at the beach, or you're at a ball field, I mean, outside is much less of a concern than a confined space, right? So confined spaces are much more of an issue. If there's social distancing going on, 6 feet, 10 feet, whatever you want to say, there's controversy about it, but some distancing is an important thing, wearing your mask. But if other kids aren't wearing a mask, but they're also keeping some distance, or your child is, it's going to be okay, especially if they're outside. Again, I think it's talking to them and using some good judgment, but outside in fresh air is much less of a risk than enclosed spaces. So our kids going for a bike ride with a group of kids is probably something that needs to be done. I think we can teach them the best we can to be wise and be smart. Wash their hands when they come home, try not to be touching their face, doing the right things to try to not spread this illness. But I think at the same time, especially as the summer comes around, they're going to have to do some socializing. If they're uncomfortable, if your child's uncomfortable in that situation where they're not wearing a mask, I am, well, after a certain point, maybe they get on their bike and go away. I'll see you guys later. So I think we have to have good discussions about it.
Yeah, I think that's a very, do you mind if I jump in? Is that, that's a very good question. And I think Dr. Orr's getting to the heart of the matter is to have a discussion with your child about the inevitability of that scenario. That will happen. And how do you as a parent want your child to handle it? How do they feel they should handle it? And just to have an honest sharing and kind of a harm reduction strategy, which is, what's the best possible, if you can't do the safest thing, what's the next step down? And I think I'm old enough to remember when bicycle helmets became kind of the thing that you had to have your kid wear for skateboarding and for bicycling. And there was a whole cultural shift where kids would not comply and parents would hide out in the bushes and catch their kids without the helmet, and then they'd be in big trouble. And it was a whole thing. I think that's kind of the same kind of cultural norm changing thing that we're trying to ask them to do with masks and safety. And the more discussion and flexibility with good guidance that you can give as a parent, the better.
That is great perspective on that. And it is so hard.
Yeah.
Along that line, I think we wanted to talk a little bit about even just the physical health of our kids right now, in that this time period, they're a lot less active than normal. And especially for kids that are, normally sports is what occupies their time. And we don't know when sports are coming back. So I'm wondering, maybe Rebecca, you can take this and we can pass it around too. But, like if you have a child who's typically really active, always out doing things, and then all of a sudden this child is now laying on the couch most of the day. You can say all you want, go outside, get some exercise, but they don't always listen. So what do we do? How do we fix this? We know they need it. And what's happening here?
Yeah, I think that I have a lot of thoughts about this because, I think on one hand, some of that like lack of motivation and inability to like kind of just go out and I'm going to go for a run and be kind of self-motivated in that way. That doesn't come easily to our kids. And then we kind of jumped them into a scenario where like their options for physical activity have now like shrunk. They really had to do for a long period of time individual activities. There are those unique bunch of kids that are self-motivated for the fitness aspect of sports and athletics. But I think what we have to keep in mind is most of our kids do sports for the social aspect of what they get out of the activity. So I think that is kind of the root of the problem, is that our kids don't really know what to do instead. And then they're doing things that are kind of more inactive, laying around. And then we introduce all that screen time and video games as like, that was like what they were feeling as like their only option for how I can entertain myself. I think with the weather getting warmer and a little bit of loosening around the restrictions, I think our kids are going to be able to get a picture of what I can do with my friends that is active. I think we really have to go back to, like, for most of our kids, it's the social aspects of the sports that is the most motivating, and to kind of get them paired up with a friend to do something that could be, done while you're social distancing. I think that's going to be one way to get them motivated. The other piece is I think our kids are less motivated, and nothing sucks motivation out of our kids more than video gaming, over long periods of time. So, getting back to what
Mark was saying earlier is that, having some parameters around that screen time, because I do think it does impact their energy level, their mood, their sleep, all sorts of things. So kind of having some structures about like when and how much time they can game. And then when you remove the technology, they're going to find something else to do that's not tech-based. And, for some of our kids, that might be something that's active. So.
Let's hope. Let's hope. Another thing about being active alongside of that or being inactive, a lot of our kids are just telling us they're bored a lot of the time. I hear that a lot in my house. And Brian, I know you have a lot to say about kids and boredom, and I'm wondering if you talked about that a little bit earlier, but I'm wondering if you could go a little deeper into it.
I love boredom. I think kids should be bored more often. There's recent evidence about boredom that our kids are so programmed and so getting the MCAS and then scheduled and everything that they and the parents then keep giving them things to do, entertaining them, entertainment coming to our home and not having to go and work for it, so that it's very hard when our kids say, "Oh, I'm bored." Well, we've had a decrease in creativity in a whole section of the population. That's what universities are seeing. That's where some high schools are seeing. And it's because kids aren't creating for themselves in their own spaces at a time when they're young and their mind is flexible enough to do it. So boredom should be welcomed. I'm glad you're bored. Now, why don't you think of something to do? But the tendency is for the parent to think that this is my responsibility, that the child's bored. It's not. It's the child's responsibility. I'm glad you're bored. That's Dr. Orr says this will increase your creativity. So I think after a while you'll come up with something to do. So go be bored for a while. That's okay. It's okay to be bored. And that's fine. And this is another thing where if you have somebody who's really plaguing you with that, say this is the time where you come up with, say, okay, you come up with a few things to do and I'll come up with a few things to do. We'll compare notes and we'll see what you can do on your own without me and see something else that we can do together later on. So so being suggestive in that way is a good idea. But the tendency is for parents to come up with all the ideas. But we should be throwing it back to them to come up with the ideas to solve their own boredom. And they'll come up with some really creative ideas about it.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I couldn't agree more. And I think one subtlety about boredom is that we understand it in psychology as in part being induced by a lack of connection, either to another person or to a creative outlet, like you're saying. So if you can suggest to your child, what you want to do is connect with a creative thing, and you have to put the vocabulary differently, obviously, for them, or you want to connect with another person, or both. So that's what you're looking for. That's the general guideline. Now you come up with some ideas and I'll come up with ideas. I like what you're saying, Dr. Orr.
I like that too. And I'm going to say that it's okay to be bored. Go be bored in your room. I'm going to try that tomorrow.
I love being bored. I love being bored. Doesn't happen too often.
I know, it's kind of a luxury to be bored. Well, I think, this is sort of a topic shift and we're kind of at the end of our time, but I think this is a hot button question. So I just want to see if we can quickly delve into it. It's challenging for our kids. We've talked a little bit about mask wearing, a little bit about different rules in different families, but they really are vastly different among families right now. And how do we help our kids not be so frustrated with that when they see maybe a group of their friends hanging out at the beach with no masks on, and that's not how, our family does it. How do we address that? How do we make it okay for them and help them get through this time? Rebecca, you want to try it?
Sure. I think, pandemic or no pandemic, we as parents deal with that a lot. Our family rules can be different from Susie's family and Joey's family. And it goes back to what Dr. Orr was saying earlier, is that we base our family rules on our values, our unique family situation. And in this situation, our rules are going to be slightly different from other families based on whether we have a frontline worker in our family, whether we have contact with elderly or people who are immunocompromised. So I think it's like the bigger discussion about, you always have to have that conversation with your kid about our rules, and our family rules are not going to be the same as Joey's. And that's okay. And it's not going to feel great all the time. I can help you navigate that and help you come up with some words that you might want to say if you're in a tough situation where it comes up. But, in general, parents are all different. Families are all different. You often also base your rules on your own kid and what their regulatory skills are and their understanding of the world. So, there's going to be many variations, and this is like just parenting in general, but now add the pandemic layer to it. So it's tough. It's not easy. And I say to my kids and other parents, it's okay that it's not the same. That's not, it's not about fairness because everybody's situation is different.
Mm.
Well, this has been so helpful and such a good conversation. I want to give Brian and Mark just a chance to say any last things they'd like to put out there to the parent community too. Thank you, Rebecca, for that last answer too. Mark, is there anything you want to leave us with? Any top things you want parents to be considering as we get through this together?
That was just saying that was a great answer that Rebecca just gave. I really like what she had to say there. Top things would be open a space for your kids to be honest about what pressures they're facing and what their feelings are. Try not to judge their feelings. You have to enforce the rules, as Rebecca was just alluding to, at the end of the day. But if you can do that balancing act of letting them say whatever absurd or crazy thing that comes into their head without judging them or giving them a consequence for thinking or feeling, that's really important.
Nice. What about you, Brian? Any last?
Well, I have to agree also with Rebecca. I remember I think it was Anthony Wolf wrote a book, It's Not Fair. Jeremy Spencer's parents let him stay up all night. And that was the title of the book. And it's a common theme that kids say, it's not fair. They don't have to do it. And we have to institute our rules for our family. But I think this is an important time for us to reflect about family and caring for our kids and recognizing that what we're doing for our kids is caring for them out of love and respect for them. Don't be too hard on yourselves as parents, to fathers and mothers dealing with all that they're dealing with in the houses today. I think we have to be very forgiving of ourselves. Yes, we need some structure. Yes, we don't have to listen to all their complaints or own all their behaviors and own all their emotions. We just have to respect them for who they are, what they're feeling, what they're going through. Recognize that doing things as a family dinners, reading, listen to audiobooks, watching movies together, those things are things that will bond us together over time, that will be much more powerful for them than anything else during this time. It's really a time to really focus the family as a team and work together to care for each other.
That is a lovely thought to leave us with. Thank you for bringing it to that nice point. And thank you all so much for being part of this and so generously sharing your good advice and your insight and your wisdom. It's really helpful. I know it is to me, and I know it is to all the people who are listening and are part of this tonight. So Brian, Mark, Rebecca, thank you. John, thank you for your help in moderating, and everyone who attended. Thank you so much for being part of this. We're so happy to have you here, and we would love to continue the conversation. So I'll send out a quick email that you can give us some feedback on tonight. And if you have suggestions for future conversations, we'd love to do it again. And we will follow up with some resource information that Rebecca's going to send along. So thanks, everybody. Hang in there. We're getting there. It's going to be okay.
Thanks for
Yes.
having this.
Thank you.
Very
Yes,
helpful.
thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Everybody.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.